Hello and welcome back. I'm Elizabeth and this is Time Scholar, and I'm very happy to have you here yet again today. So firstly, before I dive into the video today, I've got a couple of admin-y things that I wanted to discuss. One of which is I just wanted to say thank you so much for over 200 subscribers in my first month of uploading. That is insane. I did not expect my channel to be growing this quickly, to find so many people who love history as well. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for every like, comment, subscribe, all of it, and I will be here to continue every week, every Friday. There will be a new video, either ancient history or modern history for you as well. And on that note, if there is anything you would like covered by me, you know, ancient history, modern history, a war, a specific event, anything, just leave a comment below and I will do my best to put a video together for you guys and report on it as well for you. So now for today's video, I'm going to be talking about another ancient myth, one that I really enjoy, and it's got its roots in Crete and Athens, so really in the Greek world, but it became very popular throughout the Roman world as well. And it's still got a lot of prevalence today. You know, in the ancient world it was famed by authors such as Ovid and Plutarch, and yeah, its legacy is really enduring. You can still see the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur in, you know, modern day media and literature, things such as children's books like Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief and that entire series of books, which I think are an absolutely amazing read. They're actually what got me into ancient history in the first place. Definitely give them a read if you haven't. Don't watch the movies. The movies are awful. The books are great. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And yeah, so that if that interests you, grab a cup of tea, coffee, whatever beverage you prefer, and let's go. So I'm going to give a little bit of background first on who Theseus actually was, because there was far more to Theseus than just the myth of him and the Minotaur. Him himself was a hero of Attic legend. You know, outside of his run-in with just the Minotaur, he really did a lot. You know, his parentage is also slightly up for debate, which really adds to his sort of heroicness. So he was either the son of Aegeus, the king of Athens, and Aretha, or he was the son of Poseidon, so one of the big three gods, and Aretha. So he was either of nobility or of godliness. So whichever way you cut it, Theseus was a powerful man from the off. And regarding Aegeus actually and his parentage of Theseus, there is actually a myth and legend behind that itself. So the only reason Theseus actually came to be was because Aegeus, his father, he was a childless man, and he was given the permission by Pythias to have a child with his daughter Aretha, which was Theseus's mother. And yeah, that's how Theseus came to be, so that's one version of his myth as well. And the Minotaur was actually not the first beast or monster or event, however you want to really categorize it, that Theseus actually had to run into in his time either. And he actually ran into a lot of missions, beasts, on his journey to the Minotaur and to that entire myth that I think is really the one that fames him today. So when Theseus reached manhood or adulthood, his mother sent him to Athens, and it was on this journey that he encountered a lot of these missions pre-Minotaur. So at the Isthmus of Corinth, which was known in the ancient world as the landmark that separated the Peloponnese from mainland Greece, like today there is a bridge that goes over it and there's plaques on either side. I think one of them might even mention Theseus. I think Plutarch, actually mentioned Theseus as well in regards to a monument that was there, but I'm not entirely sure about it today. But it was here that Theseus really started his journey with the Minotaur. You know, it is here that he killed Sinis, who was a bandit, a thief, and he was also known as the Pine Bender, and not like in a cool waterbender avatar type of way, but in a weird, scary, murdery way. He was known as the Pine Bender because he used to tie his victims to pine trees and then tear them apart between these pine trees. So he was a lovely guy, I'm sure. Anyway, after this, Theseus dealt with the Cremonian boar. He flung Sciron, another guy who wasn't that great. He had a really bad habit of, he'd ask people to wash his feet and then he'd fling them into the ocean. So Theseus flung him off a cliff. And then he slayed Proscrates, and then in Megara he killed Saracen, who was a man who forced strangers to wrestle with him. So he met a bunch of absolutely lovely characters on his way to Athens. So it's very safe to say that Theseus had a very eventful trip to Athens. You know, I don't think many of us go on a cross-country trip and have to, you know, deal with a bunch of bad guys all the time. So yeah, a lot happened in his life before the Minotaur, and this actually didn't stop when he hit Athens. He didn't get a bit of a break before the Minotaur. It continued. So when Theseus arrived, he saw that his father had married Medea, who is a famed sorceress. She is actually in a lot of other mythology. She has an entire play written about her in her own right. And if you know Jason and the Argonauts as well, she is part of that. She was originally married to Jason. She killed their 2 children, so on and so forth. I'll do another video on Medea. I love her. But Medea tried to poison Theseus upon arrival because she was worried that Aegeus would realize that Theseus was Theseus and say, this is my son, this is heir to the Athenian throne, and make him Prince of Athens. But this poisoning did fail. Aegeus did realize that Theseus was his son, and Theseus was named Prince of Athens and heir to the Athenian throne. So overall, Theseus was a hero of Attic legend that may have even been of godly descent, but even if not, there was a legend surrounding his parentage anyway. And he dealt with a lot of hardship, eventfulness, before he even reached the Minotaur. So it's safe to say that upon reaching the Minotaur, Theseus had dealt with his fair share of interesting experiences just from leaving his mother and going to Athens. So, what is a Minotaur? The Minotaur is actually a mythical creature that gained popularity in classical antiquity, so in ancient Greece, and it is perceived as having the head and tail of a bull, but the body of a man. The Roman poet Ovid, which really does, again, just state to how prevalent this myth is through time, referred to the Minotaur as being part man, part bull. So there was really no discussion or argument over what the Minotaur was. He was half beast, half human. And the Minotaur actually had his own name. The Minotaur was known as Asterion, and he lived in a labyrinth which was an incredibly complicated maze-like structure, which was built so that nobody could get out of it. So it was built to contain the Minotaur, and it was actually built by Icarus and Daedalus. If you know about the story of Icarus flying too close to the sun, it was built by him and his father, which I love. I just love how all Greek mythology, there's some link in there, whether you like it or not. And so the Minotaur itself has their own creation myth as well. So Minos, after becoming king of Crete, which he had to fight his siblings for, prayed to Poseidon for a snow-white bull. And he wanted this to prove that the gods favoured him, to be king of Crete. And Poseidon went, yeah, sure, here's a snow-white bull for you, but you have to sacrifice, that's the word, you have to sacrifice it to me to show that you honour me as your god. Minos didn't do that, though. Minos saw the bull and was like, that bull's too beautiful, I'll just sacrifice something else, Poseidon will be fine, I'll do another sacrifice to him. Poseidon was not fine. Poseidon did not like that at all. So instead of, I don't know, being an adult, Poseidon decided to get revenge, and he did this by punishing Minos. So the way that he actually punished Minos was by making a deal with Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, amongst a bunch of other things as well. And the deal he made was for Minos' wife, Persephone, to fall in love with a bull. And that happened. So Daedalus, the same person who later went on to build the labyrinth, Icarus' dad, built her a hollow wooden cow. And I feel like, use your imagination here, she climbed inside it, and boom, she was pregnant with a Minotaur. And yeah, there we go. It all happened. Poseidon got his wish. And although Pasiphae attempted to raise the Minotaur as her son, he became ferocious, and it said this is because he was part beast and part human. There was no natural food source for him. Instead, he was trying to eat people, which isn't great. So this led Asterion, the Minotaur, to being held in the labyrinth built by Daedalus on the instruction of Minos. So it was actually Minos who put him in there to begin with. So yeah, the Minotaur himself had a very interesting start to life. He did not just appear in the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. He does have his own creation myth, which again is linked back to Minos and his wife and Poseidon and all of the gods as well, which I think is very interesting as well, considering there is that myth about Theseus's father being Poseidon. So again, it is all interlinked. So when is it that Theseus and the Minotaur actually cross paths? So after Theseus' arrival in Athens, actually not long after his arrival in Athens to be exact. So every year, in return for peace, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. Very Hunger Games-y, if you want to think about it that way, with the tributes going off to fight and hopefully not die. And this was a tribute that King Aegeus was bound to pay to King Minos, and this was in sort of retribution for the fact that King Minos' son had been killed in Athens. So then Minos defeated Athens in battle as revenge for his son's death, and in return for that, as part of the peace treaty, Aegeus had to give 14 Athenian children, really youths, teenagers, to Minos every year to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. So a rather violent part of a peace treaty, but it is the ancient world. So Theseus learnt of this upon his arrival in Athens, and he hated the needless violence. And so when the boats came for the third year in a row, because by the time that Theseus had got there, this had only happened twice so far, Theseus went with them. He just jumped on the boat. He was confident that he could defeat the Minotaur, and he was confident that he could stop Athens from having to do this. So defeating the Minotaur was actually twofold for Theseus. Firstly, it would, be great for Athens, but it would also bring him a lot of glory and honor, which is something that was incredibly important in ancient Greece, especially for ancient Greek heroes. Because if you died in battle, or you died an honorable death, or full of glory, you'd be able to go into the upper echelon of Hades, which was the Elysium Fields. And that is where, heroes, people who had laid down their lives for the gods, for Greece, got to spend their days. It was known as a utopia. So if you were, a hero, that is where you wanted to be in the underworld, and to do that, you had to have glory. So it was a twofold for Theseus, really. So upon the boat arriving in Knossos, which is the Cretan city where the labyrinth was built, but it's also where King Minos' palace was, because the labyrinth was actually built directly next to the palace. So everyone knew, from looking at Theseus, from his strength and confidence and just kind of his allure, that he must be the Athenian prince. He must be the person who snuck onto the boat. And yeah, they were right, because when Theseus stood up off the boat, he looked King Minos in the eyes, and Minos just smirked at him. He thought he was stupid. He thought he was looking at, a young man with no weapon, full of arrogance, who was not going to be able to beat his Minotaur. No one had beaten the Minotaur, ever. Not just in the 2 years in which the 28 Athenian children came across, but no one had defeated the Minotaur. There was a reason he was locked up in this impenetrable labyrinth as well. So Minos just smirked at him. He was like, this man will never defeat my Minotaur. So upon this, Theseus and the other Athenians were taken to the dungeons and locked away, preparing themselves for the next morning when they'll be taken to the entrance of the labyrinth to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. And it was through the night that the Athenian youths really shared stories of the Minotaur and his incredible strength, his strong legs, his jet black eyes. The Minotaur was known. He was a known beast and being, and he was scary. And I feel like that is really important to know. Theseus going into this wasn't just a man of grandeur, it was also fear. He would have been scared. The Minotaur was known as this ferocious being of, godly interaction as well. So there was a lot to it. It wasn't just, fighting somebody else. It was scary. So in the night, Theseus was actually visited by Minos' daughter Ariadne, who again is very prevalent later on in Greek mythology. And she was beautiful. And that was one of the first things that Theseus noted, was that she was beautiful and royal, but she also came bearing gifts. So once she confirmed that Theseus was the Athenian prince and the son of Aegeus, she told him of the Minotaur. She told him everything that she knew, which was far more than sort of the legends and myths that the Athenian youths knew, because she lived there. She knew the Minotaur. So she told him that the Minotaur was like nothing else in the world, that he would need his utmost strength to be able to defeat this beast. So with that, she actually gifted him a bronze sword to help him with his endeavours, which again was not supposed to happen. It was supposed to be a sacrifice, not a fight. So you weren't supposed to have weapons going in at all. It was supposed to be the Minotaur would eat you and that was the end. Bye-bye, sacrifice sorted for another year, get the next 14 over next year. But not this time. But this wasn't all that Ariadne did for Theseus either. She went on to tell him about the dangers of the labyrinth, about how the floor went from smooth to rocky, how the walls were slick, it was pitch black, he would have no food, no water, no light. And the Minotaur knew his way around this labyrinth is another thing that she noted to tell him, because the Minotaur, this was his home. He knew what he was doing, he knew where he was going. So she also told him that Douglas built the labyrinth knowing the Minotaur could not escape. So that was very important to note. There was no escape from the labyrinth unless you were to kill the Minotaur. The Minotaur would eventually find you. It could take days, weeks, but he would do it. But she did also note that Daedalus's intention was never to have built the labyrinth to torment innocent children either. He was not very happy with what Minos had actually done with his creation. So with this, Ariadne actually continued to give Theseus gifts. She gave him a crimson thread with instructions to tie it to the door of the labyrinth upon arrival, because she told him there is no snowflake chance in hell, basically, that you are going to get out of that labyrinth off memory alone. The way that it is built, no one's escaping it. So she gave him this thread in order to be able to follow it back to the front door of the labyrinth so he'd be able to find his way out again. And Theseus was ecstatic. He was like, this is great. He now had all of the tools he needed to help him in his plan of slaying the Minotaur. And Ariadne was incredibly gracious. She only asked for one thing in return, which was she wanted to return to Athens with him, become his bride, and return with the rest of the Athenians. And this was because she was scared of her father's anger upon realizing that she had helped Theseus and helped bring an end to the Minotaur. And Theseus agreed. It was an easy, yeah, cool. You know, he looked at her and realized that she was of royalty. She was beautiful. You know, she was pristine, for lack of a better term, and she realised that his father, would be absolutely happy for her to become Queen of Athens one day. So he agreed, and with that Ariadne left, leaving enough food and water as well that she had bought in a basket for every Athenian to fuel up for the next day, not just Theseus. So it really speaks to her character there as well. So the next morning the Cretan guards came round and actually asked for, well actually they wanted to get the first Athenian to face the Minotaur. They weren't going to ask for volunteers, they didn't expect anyone to volunteer, they expected to just have to, you know, drag someone out and be like, look, it's your turn, off you pop to certain death. But it didn't happen. Theseus himself was bolstered from the food he'd had, from the prayers he had been doing all evening. He prayed to Zeus, the king of the gods, he prayed to Ares, the god of war, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Hephaestus, which I feel like is a god that isn't really praised as much, but he was the god of the forge. So that is why Theseus prayed to him for help with his sword, to make sure that his sword did not break. And so the guards agreed when Theseus was like, yep, I'll do it, take me. So, yeah, they took him to the Cretan court where he was honoured, and he was looked down upon by all these Cretan courtiers who thought they were never going to see him again. But whilst walking through the crowd, Theseus actually saw Ariadne with Daedalus, who was shocked to see Theseus there, and shocked to know of his plan, because I'm not entirely sure, but in my opinion, I think Ariadne would have told Daedalus of Theseus' plan as well. So, shortly after this, Theseus was thrown into the labyrinth rather unceremoniously. You know, the Cretan guards threw him in and buggered off because they didn't think he was going to survive. The door slammed, and Theseus then retrieved his sword and the thread from where he had hidden it in the pleats of his tunic, which I think was quite smart. And, you know, he tied the thread to an exposed nail on the door, and started his way into the labyrinth, unravelling the thread as he went, because whilst walking he realised that Ariadne was right. There was no way he was going to be able to find his way back to the front door by memory alone, so he unwinded the thread to be able to find his way back. And sometimes under his feet, Theseus felt it go from the smooth stone of the labyrinth to the crushing of bones from those who had been there previously. And, you know, I think personally it would be more than just the 28 Athenian children who went there. You know, if you've got, Minos was clearly not disposed to using the Minotaur as fear. You know, anyone who got mad at him might have just been thrown into that labyrinth. So, as he walked, he started to smell the Minotaur, because obviously he only had two left. Like, he could hear and he could smell, but that was it. He couldn't see. So, he started to smell the Minotaur, and upon drawing his sword, he knew that that sound would make Asterion hear him. He knew that the Asterion was near, and he was completely right, because out of nowhere in the dark, Theseus felt the Minotaur's breath on his shoulder, and then he felt it snorting in his face in like almost a matter of seconds. You know, and Theseus attempted to start his attack, but it didn't last very long before he was knocked to the floor by the Minotaur. And no matter how many times Theseus hit the Minotaur with his sword, he could not injure him. And like at this point it seemed like it was all over for Theseus. He was just going to be another one of those Athenian children, youths, teenagers, young people who were taken as a sacrifice to Crete every year, and Athens was going to have to continue to give Crete this sort of sacrifice every single year, whether they liked it or not. You know, and Theseus was then grabbed by the ankles and dragged through the labyrinth on his back, lifted above the Minotaur's head, And the Minotaur was ready. Asterion was just going to slam him into the ground, call it a day, have a feast, you know, he was done, sorted. But this is when Theseus actually saw a chance to change fate, not just for him, but for everybody else as well. So he plunged his sword just below the Minotaur's arm, because obviously when you have your arms up, you've got that little soft spot exposed. And Theseus had done it. He defeated the Minotaur. This Minotaur actually fell to the ground in pain. And Theseus, rather, you know, messed up from a battle with a massive half-man, half-bull, scrambled up and he felt for his thread. He was really worried that in all of this sort of commotion it had broken, but it hadn't. So he followed the thread back to the entrance and tried the door. But it is then that he remembered that, of course, he's not going to get out. No one was supposed to leave this place. So he knocked 3 times, and it was Ariadne who let him out because the Cretan guards had left, not expecting anyone to survive. And he handed her the thread that she had so graciously given him that helped him escape, and called to the guards. And Theseus then returned to Minos' court alongside Ariadne and the guards, and it was here that Theseus faced an incredibly angry Minos. Minos was not at all happy, because now he meant that his sacrifices were over, his Minotaur was dead, and his peace treaty still had to have peace, but with no revenge. It does seem like King Minos was a rather vengeful man, you know, and I do feel like some of that definitely stems from what Poseidon did to him with Snow White Bull. But he didn't even argue with Theseus at this point. He was actually so angry that he was just like, get him out of my sight. He didn't argue when Theseus said, round up the Athenians and put them on the boat, we're going home. Nothing. So Theseus got on the boat with the rest of the Athenians, and also Ariadne and her younger sister, who actually stood on the bow and waved goodbye to Crete as the ship left. But Minos didn't even see that. He was so angry that he would not even watch the ship depart. So he missed his daughter's leaving as well. So although the story of Theseus and the Minotaur seems like it has a happy ending, for obviously not everyone, not for the Minotaur, and Minos wasn't too happy either, but for most people, that unfortunately isn't the full story. So there are actually 2 real victims of this story, one of which is Aegeus and the other one is Ariadne, but I'm going to start with Aegeus first. So Theseus had actually promised Aegeus that if he had won, if he had beaten the Minotaur, that he would fly home on a white sail. Because when they sent the Athenians off to Crete, they flew them on a black sail, you know, a symbol of mourning, death. And yeah, so Theseus said, if I win, if I defeat this Minotaur, I will fly back on a white sail. The idea of purity, hope, you know, like to prove to his father that he had done it, he had not died. But after all of the commotion and everything that had happened, Theseus forgot. He completely forgot about this promise he'd made to his father about flying home on a white flag. So as the ship was pulling into Athens, Aegeus was stood atop the Acropolis, big mountain in Athens, and he was waiting to see the ship. He wanted proof that his son was alive, but unfortunately he didn't get that because of Theseus' mistake. So when Aegeus actually saw that ship coming in, he was overwhelmed with grief and upset upon seeing that black flag, to the point that he actually threw himself off at the top of the Acropolis to his death, because he couldn't cope with the fact that his son was dead, although, as we know, he wasn't. And Ariadne's story actually was not all sunshine and rainbows either, despite Theseus' promise that he would take her back to Athens, and, you know, she would get married to him and it would be an absolutely fine life. That also didn't happen. So it is said there's 2 different versions of her myth, but they both start with her being abandoned on Naxos by Theseus on their way back to Athens. So she didn't even make it to Athens. Theseus got rid of her on the island of Naxos before he even reached home. And that's where the myth splits. So there are 2 versions, one of which is that she, you know, ended her own life on Naxos, and the other one is that Theseus left her there to die, and she was saved by Dionysus, king of, you know, wine, revelry, the Bacchanalia, all of that, and eventually married him. So there's also, it wasn't the best ending for Ariadne either, because she was just left to her own devices. And then also Theseus went on to do some not great things post defeating the Minotaur as well. So if you know of Helen of Troy, I did do a video on her previously if you'd like to check it out, but he actually kidnapped her around the age of 7, and his plan was to keep her until she was of the right age to marry. And obviously Theseus was far older than her at this point, so it's creepy enough to begin with, but Secondly, you don't just go around kidnapping people. So, and he did other things as well. That landed him in Hades. You know, he did a lot more with his life afterwards. But I really feel like personally that defeating the Minotaur was the pinnacle of Theseus' career, and that's what we know him for. We know him for his tryst with the Minotaur far more than we know him for kidnapping Helen. And the reason he kidnapped Helen was the same reason that Paris kidnapped Helen all those years later, was that she was the most beautiful woman, if not in Greece, if not in Europe, in the world. So he wanted her as his bride, but it didn't go to fruition, obviously. We know that Helen ended up marrying Menelaus, and then the Trojan War happened, and all of that other history as well. But yeah, so even though the story of Theseus and the Minotaur seemed to have a pretty good ending for the Athenians, not so much the Grecians, it didn't end in all happiness for everyone. So yeah, that was the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, which I honestly think is a really good enduring myth. I feel like it really teaches us a lot if you want to read into the sort of the meaning behind it, which I like to do a lot, as I did previously with my Prometheus video as well. But I feel like, I don't know, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur really teaches you not to step back from things that are scary, to accept help when you need it, like Theseus did from Ariadne, but also teaches sort of the fear of, like, arrogance is bad. Like, if you look at Minos, in the end he was the one who was arrogant. No one could defeat his Minotaur, and it led to him losing both of his daughters. So, overall, I think that, you know, the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur is prevalent today for those reasons, and also just because it's a great story. Like, the idea of a man going and defeating this half bull, half man, and then just walking out and being like, yeah, I've done it, can I go home now? Like, obviously there was more to it than that, but I think the story itself is just absolutely great as well. And that's one of the reasons why it's so enduring, and it's so easy as well. Like, the Minotaur is now not just classical legend, but I feel like, you know, if you ask people what's a Minotaur, most people will know to some extent. They'll say, like, half bull, half man, half cow, half man. You know, the Minotaur in itself is its entire own sort of mythical being, outside of just being, you know, punishment from Poseidon, which I think is really interesting as well. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. So next week will be a modern history video. I'm not quite sure what yet. I might do a little poll and leave it, so if I do, keep an eye out in my YouTube posts for that, and then you can have a choice yourself. And yeah, if there's anything that you would like covered, make sure to leave a little comment below, and I will do my absolute best. I've actually got a list going at the moment of suggestions, so I'm sort of weaving them in as I go. And yeah, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more of me and more of my history as well. And yeah, I hope you guys have guys, how if I could talk, wouldn't I? I hope you guys have a brilliant rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are.